What we will do is the opening statement. If we could, if Congressman Huelskamp, you would like to start us with the opening statement, and then we will move to Dr. Marshall.
Thank you, Mark and Steve, and thank you to the high school for letting us be here tonight. I think it's a great opportunity. And this is so much about what our political system should be about, a discussion about where we go from here. And I will tell you, if you want to know who Tim Huelskamp is, you have to drive about 70 miles from here and go to a little farm I grew up on, which is bigger than it used to be. But I'm a fifth-generation farm kid, and that's what I grew up doing. And I tell my kids we certainly work harder back then than we do today, or they do. But born and raised on that farm, and went to a small school in Fowler, and grew up there, and went away for a number of years and got my education, and met my lovely wife, and then decided, you know what, I'm going to go back home and farm. And so I went back and I've been farming ever since with my brother. My dad passed away about a year and a half ago. But if you want to know what I'm about, you have to look at the hometown values of a small town and growing up on a farm. And I will tell you, it's a tremendous honor, a tremendous responsibility, just to be able to serve you in Congress. I think it's, I've seen the opportunities we've had in this job. I will say in the last 5 years, one thing I did promise before I started this job when I was campaigning last time was I was going to go visit every single county every single year. And that's 63 counties, and I've done that. So 372 town halls listening and hearing and taking your concerns back to Washington. I now serve as the chairman of the Small Business Committee. I serve on the VA committee. I serve on the steering committee that makes all the committee assignment decisions for the U.S. House. But most importantly, it's about what our values are and what values I can take to Washington. But I will tell you, what I hear from Kansans and what I'm likely to hear tonight, if this crowd's the same I've heard from thousands of Kansans, is we're worried about our future. Worried about $20 trillion of debt. Worried about an administration that's unaccountable and out of control. We're worried about agencies like the EPA that want to regulate every last drop of water. But on all these particular issues, I've been pushing back. I've been pushing back on the EPA, pushing back on the administration, pushing back on the courts and say, hey, we've got a constitution, we've got our conservative principles and values, and we're going to fight for those. And oftentimes I disagree with the President of the United States. There's times I agree with him. There's one time we did agree, and in particular, and that was the need for reform of the VA. And I was proud to write the VA choice legislation that, as of today, has allowed over 14,000 folks across the 1st District get to pick their doctor, choose their hospital instead of being forced to go into the VA system that may not be working for them. That's making progress. Now, we have plenty of other things to make progress on. I will tell you, as a 5th-generation farm kid, probably the proudest moment I have is the opportunities I've had to sit down with ambassadors from foreign nations, from Japan, from Vietnam, from even Cuba, and say, hey, we have tremendous things we grow in western Kansas, whether it's wheat, corn, cattle, soybeans, and we'd like to sell those to you. And so we've helped open up those markets. And then that's not on job description, but I think I'm often being an ambassador for Kansas agriculture. Also on the regulatory side, I say without a doubt, there are folks that are scared of the EPA. They're scared of the IRS. They're scared of HHS. They're scared about new regulations that are going to make their small businesses disappear, make their large businesses disappear. And I've been pushing back on that. But what I've been frustrated oftentimes with my Republican folks in Washington is the fact that we haven't used the tremendous power over the purse that Congress has. Congress has a tremendous ability to tell the EPA to quit regulating every last drop of water. And we got that through the House. It didn't make it through the Senate and through the President's desk. We were able to push back on the listing of the lesser prairie chicken. And I will tell you, most folks in Washington don't know the difference between the greater or the lesser chicken. But after 5 years of working with folks in counties all across the western Kansas, we're able to take that bird off the listing and protect our private property rights, protect our ability to grow the economy. But that's just one of the things we've been able to get done, along with the VA. Big picture on healthcare, though, I have 70 community hospitals across the big 1st District, and I have visited many of them. And they tell me, without a doubt, Obamacare is a threat to our rural hospitals. It's a threat to our healthcare system. It needs to be repealed. And I have voted 60 times to repeal Obamacare. And actually, a few of those smaller parts we were able to repeal and get rid of. But here's the problem. Here's the problem, and John Boehner's gone, so the problem hopefully will be solved. We've never actually ever voted on a replacement. I've got a replacement for Obamacare that protects our liberties, takes on the trial lawyers, provides choices, and helps our rural hospitals, something called the American Health Care Reform Act. But what happened in Washington with Republicans is they wouldn't let us vote on it. And just last week, current speaker, who I do support and was with numerous times about these issues, has introduced an alternative. But ladies and gentlemen, unless you're able to vote on that, unless you're able to vote on getting rid of the IRS and the $75,000 in tax code. We've got a long ways to go. Washington, D.C. is a status quo town. It really is. And there's not much peace in Washington, as you saw this week on the House floor. I don't know if you saw that. Democrats laying all across the House floor, demanding no action, saying we can't vote on anything, and shutting down the House. We went ahead and got our business done. But at the end of the day, there's no making peace with Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama on issues we disagree on. I'm going to continue to fight for our conservative principles, to stand up for our way of life. And I think we can make a difference. But here's the warning. It's not easy. And it's not going to change overnight. But we definitely, I think, need a new president. I think we'll see some tremendous changes. But at the end of the day, we need Congress and the president willing to learn to live within the Constitution and actually fight for what we believe. So I appreciate and look forward to your questions and comments later tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Huelskamp.
Good evening, Garden City. Well, let me try this again. Good evening, Garden City. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you so much for coming. I'm Dr. Roger Marshall. I'm a physician. I'm not a politician. So that means my speeches will be short and I'll stay within the time limit. So that's good news for you. I'm just not a physician, I'm an obstetrician. I've been on call every day or every other day for 25 years. And over those 25 years, we've delivered over 5,000 babies. And what I've learned, the most important clinical skill set a physician has is not their ability to read a radiograph or an ultrasound or an MRI, it's their ability to listen. And if you think about the quality physicians in your life, I bet they were good listeners. And I bet if you knew these good physicians, they were great listeners and they helped diagnose your problems. What I've learned is if I listen to my patients long enough, they'll tell me what's wrong with them. And if I listen longer, they'll even tell me how to fix them. Before I tell you where I'm going, I want to tell you where I've been. I grew up in El Dorado, Kansas. I too was a fifth-generation farm kid. By the time I was 2 years old, my parents realized they weren't going to be able to make a living on 160 acres anymore. So they moved into town. My dad became the chief of police there in El Dorado for 25 years. We continued our ag upbringing. I spent my weekends working on the family farm. By the time I was 14, I was spending my summer on those farms, mostly hauling hay. The easy days were on the backside of a tractor. By the time I was 16, I was working at the local livestock auction, sorting cattle. I certainly understand the difference between heifers and steers and understand the hard work of agriculture. I was a first-generation person from my family to go to college. I went to the local community college on a track scholarship and an academic scholarship. I worked myself through college, did multiple jobs. There's probably not a job in the Big First I haven't done growing up. I've painted fences, I've worked at the refinery, I've worked in the oil field. I've worked all sorts of different jobs. My most famous job at K-State was being a bartender at Kites. It was there I learned my social graces in many aspects of life. Went on to KU Med Center and joined the Army Reserves. My wife and I thought it was time to have a family and we needed to support that family. My dad served in the military, my brother had served in the military. I thought it was my chance to serve my country as well, so we spent 7 years in the Army Reserve. In particular, we did special training for Desert Storm. Certainly it's great as a congressman to have a little bit of background in military, the ability to sit down with the general or a private at Fort Riley and have a conversation in their own language. After a residency program, my wife and I went back to Great Bend, Kansas, and people ask me why we went there. The most important reason is we wanted to raise our kids in rural America. That's how we both knew how to raise our kids and have enjoyed raising our kids there in the public school system. My youngest son is a senior this year. We look forward to playing Garden City this year in football. You guys beat us at home this last year. We got you back home in Great Bend this year. So looking forward to a good game. My son will be the tailback and the safety. So keep your eyes on him. He's number 11. And people ask me, so why did you stay in Great Bend? We stayed in Great Bend because all 4 of our kids had the same first grade teacher. What a wonderful opportunity when you drop your kids off in first grade and you know who the teacher is and you know that she's going to do the right thing. And one of the greatest honors I've ever had was writing the recommendation for her to be in the State Teachers Hall of Fame several years ago. She was accepted. This was the teacher who brought extra combs and brushes and toothbrushes and toothpaste to school and helped the kids out in so many ways. And all of us have been influenced by those teachers and coaches in our lives. My wife and I have been very involved in our community. We're community people. Whether it's a church we've been very active in, teaching Sunday school and children's church, deacon, elder, leading the church for 4 years. Church is a very important part of our life. Multiple other projects we've been involved with, building ball fields and swimming pools, education centers, all sorts of things. We're very involved in our community. My wife, my kids, and I have now been on the trail for about 15 months. We've traveled 30,000 miles. Hillsboro, Kansas was this morning. I think it was community number 94. We've been to 49 county farm bureau meetings, 15 feedlots, 3 big dairies, multiple farm operations. I have my fingers on the pulse of agriculture, and we're continually significantly invested in agriculture. As I've traveled these ways, what people talk to me is lacking in Washington. The biggest problem is leadership. And as I define leadership, what's important to me is the ability to grow rapport, to build teams and get things done. I think that's what leadership's about. But what leadership is not is blaming other people. Blaming John Boehner, who's been gone for 10 months. Blaming Barack Obama, who's a lame duck. Blaming Hillary Clinton, who's not even in office yet. Blaming other people is not what leaders do. We grow consensus, we bring people together, we solve problems. Thank you so much for having me. We look forward to tonight's discussions.
Thank you. A reminder, those of you in the audience, if you have a question, please raise your hand so we can get note cards to you so we can get them in time to ask the question. On the questions now that we have here, I'm going to start with Dr. Marshall. There was a bill introduced in the U.S. House to limit the amount of times that students are required to be tested. It will actually decrease it. What is your opinion on that?
I want every decision that can be made locally. I'm not interested in the federal government telling Garden City how to manage your kids. I want your local school board, your local superintendent, who I've sat down and visited with, spent an hour with, who I understand the problems and the challenges that Garden City has. Whether it's English as a second language, not enough facilities, your students are sitting outside in buildings. I understand what's going on here in Garden City from an education standpoint. You don't need the federal government telling you how to manage your schools.
Thank you. Next, Congressman Huelskamp.
Yeah, Martin, great question. And I served a number of years in Topeka. At the end of the day, I think our schools need to be controlled by us, by the parents and the community and the school board and our local administrators. And you can look at my voting record. I've made it very clear. I think control of our schools should be retained by you and not bureaucrats and politicians in Washington, D.C. But I will tell you with a warning that the No Child Left Behind, Jerry Moran voted against it. I would have voted against it as well. Because at the end of the day, it does take away control of our schools. This Common Core scheme. Again, I voted against that as well, and that is still locked into No Child Left Behind. That was just re-upped just a few months ago and signed by the President of the United States. So still, we have the heavy hand of Washington, D.C. over our schools. That needs to end. If we want to improve our schools, we need to get Washington out of the way. And I'll say again and again, education is too important to be left to the people in Washington, D.C.
Kansas agriculture was without representation on the House Agricultural Committee and left out on work on the last farm bill for the first time in generations. Should you end up being placed on the Ag Committee, explain your priorities in representing Kansas.
Yeah, Mark, I will be back on the House Ag Committee, and it was John Boehner that decided to punish me and punish you for the way I voted. At the end of the day, as I told the Speaker of the House, I don't work for you, Mr. Speaker. I work for the people of Kansas. But he didn't like the way I voted. He kicked me off. He kicked 3 other people off committees. And at the end of the day, a few years later, John Boehner lost his job because he kicked too many people out of their positions. Here are my priorities on agriculture. We need more simplification of the farm policy. But the number 1 priority, and the number 2 priority, and number 3 priority has been the same, and you can see my voting record is abundantly clear. The number 1, 2, and 3 priorities for me in the farm programs is crop insurance. But here's the problem with the Farm Bill, ladies and gentlemen. 80% of the Farm Bill is food stamps. 80%. When I was a kid and started in agriculture, it was 20% food stamps, 80% agriculture. It's now been flipped. And we need to actually talk about reforming the food stamps if we actually want to pass a Farm Bill. But we need to protect crop insurance. And just this last fall, it was John Boehner and Barack Obama, and we will blame the folks that wanted to push this. They decided to cut crop insurance. I stood up and said, we're not going to do that. And I voted no. At the end of the day, we were able to get those cuts restored and to protect that. But there are plenty of problems with the farm program. One thing I want to say, work closely with Senator Pat Roberts. And Pat Roberts has endorsed my reelection. He thought it was a bad deal that they would kick the 1st District off the Ag Committee. We will be back on it. I know that for a fact because I serve on the committee that makes those decisions.
Thank you. Dr. Marshall, same question.
It's interesting to me that many people voted against Speaker Boehner, but they did not get kicked off the Ag Committee. This is a big gamble. This is probably one of the biggest issues that you all need to realize. Tim Huelskamp got kicked off the Ag Committee 3 years ago. Before that, he got kicked off the Budget Committee by then Committee Chairman Paul Ryan. So now Mr. Ryan is the Speaker of the House, and he controls to a great extent who's getting back on that Ag Committee. It's a huge gamble for our kids to think that Tim's going to get reappointed. Right now, the silence from the leadership in Washington is speaking volumes. I just certainly don't hear Speaker Ryan saying Tim's getting back on. I don't hear the chairman of the Ag Committee saying he's getting back on. I can only wish you could have been back on, Tim. The silence is echoing, and you voted against crop insurance very consistently. You voted against the Farm Bill. You voted with Nancy Pelosi against this Farm Bill. We need representation on the Farm Bill, on the Ag Committee. They're discussing the Farm Bill right now as we speak. So we just want a voice at the table to influence decisions. I will be that voice. It'll be my top priority to get on that Ag Committee. I have every reason to believe we'll be on the Ag Committee. I'm qualified to be on it. I understand agriculture. It accounts for 50% of this economy in this great state. We need a voice on the Ag Committee. Thank you.
Dr. Marshall, third question, we'll start with you on this one. What is your opinion of the current state of the Veterans Affairs Department healthcare program? What changes, if any, would you make to the current program?
Well, thank you so much. I mentioned that we've been in 90-some communities so far, and actually probably the fourth or fifth most common concern I get is from veterans and how it's not working very well yet. Most recently, my dad sent me an article from the Veterans Administration magazine, and the Commodore was bragging about 75% of patients there were happy with the service. If any of you have a business and only 75% of your customers are happy, you're going to go broke. Over and over again, I'm ashamed of the quality of care we're given at the Veterans Administration Hospital. I think we need to improve them. I've worked as a medical student and as a resident in VA hospitals. My biggest concern, though, is access. Everywhere I go, people tell me they're still waiting weeks and months. My solution is this. If it can be done in your home community, it should be done. Eliminate the paperwork, give them an appropriate card. We need to do some drastic things. I'm not sure the VA can be fixed. I think we need to consider some other alternatives other than staying within the whole system. When I see something that's totally broke, usually I let those people go, I start over, I privatize it, and if there's so many things, it'll help rural Kansas again as well. So if these healthcare services were done in these rural hospitals, it would help your rural communities as well. It's broken, it's a common complaint, we need to fix the system.
Good news for Dr. Marshall, we are already doing that. 14,000 times because of the VA Choice Program, veterans have chosen to go to the local hospital across the big first district. Not across the nation, but in just the last year and a half, 14,000 times they had that choice. So we passed the law. I helped write that with the chairman of the VA committee. And actually, there was Democrat support as well, a lot of support, because of the tremendous scandals at the VA. But what I found out again and again, particularly with the VA, is, ladies and gentlemen, you've got to challenge these folks. You've got to challenge these bureaucrats. You can't look at them and say, could you pretty please do this for me? Could we make peace about the VA? No, at the end of the day, you've got to stand up and call them out. Hundreds of people should have been fired at the VA. As far as we know, 3 people lost their jobs, and over 20 people lost their lives in Phoenix alone. That's a scandal that should be embarrassing. It started at the top all the way down. We're going to continue to push, but at the end of the day, if you're in the big first district, there is not a single VA hospital in our district, but we have 70 community hospitals. So I helped write the law that says you get that choice. And 14,000 times they've done it. But I will tell you for my office as well, over 1,000 times we've had to help veterans cut through paperwork, cut through red tape, and we're happy to do that. We're happy to do that. But here's the vision, here's the solution. It shouldn't be the case that you have to call your congressman or call a senator to get the health care we promised our veterans, and we're going to continue to fight for that. And it's a real battle. It's not something that's going to be fixed tomorrow or the next day, because we've had decades and decades of neglect and mismanagement at the VA.
Fourth question here, Congressman Huelskamp, let's start with you, please. Protecting, conserving, and developing Kansas water resources for the benefit of current and future generations is vital. Share your vision for working in Congress towards policies beneficial to Kansas, and particularly how the federal government could aid in countering the decline of the Ogallala Aquifer.
That's a great question. And my personal philosophy is this, as a farmer myself, that if we want to really are concerned about our natural resources, we first talk to our farmers and ranchers and other landowners. How do you protect them? Ask the folks that are going to live there for generations. I don't think you call bureaucrats in Washington and fix this problem. But specifically to the issue of the decline of the aquifer, I think we've had major problems in our farm programs that encourage folks to pump a lot of water. And a few years ago when I was in the state legislature, we provided some incentives. That wasn't used much, but they since have opened that up to provide more incentives to conserve and give folks a reason to save water and conserve that and save that for the next generation. I think that's absolutely critical. One thing specifically we did in reference to farm programs and biofuels is encourage the EPA at that time to designate grain sorghum, milo, maize, whatever you want to call it, we call it milo on our farm, as an advanced biofuel. So you get more credit in the formula and encourage folks out here to plant that perhaps rather than corn. I think it works well in our ethanol system, it works well going back to our feedlots, and it helps conserve our water for future generations, because that's absolutely critical. If we pump and mine out all the water, we will lose much of the economy here in southwest Kansas.
Thank you, Congressman. Dr. Marshall.
Thank you. It's certainly a great problem, and I'm out there talking to farmers and agriculture producers every day, talking about solutions. This part of my theory is you keep listening, the people that the problem affects will have the best solutions. There's no easy solutions. If it was easy, it would have already been figured out. The ones I'm coming up with thus far, number one is there is some technology opportunities. Whether it's no-till, milo, some of those types of productions, but what I'm really excited about is like putting tape underneath the ground, and it takes less water. The tapes where the irrigation comes through, and therefore you get less nutrients and less fertilizer you have to use as well. So many of the irrigation systems have increased technology. But I don't think technology is going to be able to save the world here. Eventually, we're going to have to build an aqueduct to this area. There's no way else it's going to happen. I don't think it can be done. You don't want the federal government doing it. We have to help, Kansas have to help themselves to do it. This aquifer is going down. I've also been looking for who's doing the best job of it. And one of the best groups I've seen it is Stafford County, where they're sharing water. So, and you have a water bank where if you don't use all your water, you can store it, you can sell it, so you're not motivated to keep using all the water you don't need. All over the state, I'm meeting young entrepreneurs that are developing new ways to combat the problem, but we're going to have to look to ourselves to fix this problem, not Washington.
GMO, or genetically modified organisms, labeling has been a hot topic with potentially serious ramifications for the American food system and producers. Senator Pat Roberts pushed to bar states from requiring labels for those foods stalled. Yet Roberts floated the possibility of working across the aisle on a compromise. Would you agree with that strategy?
I had a conversation recently with Senator Bob Dole, and he discussed with me a conversation he had with President Reagan once. And I'm sure you've heard the same story because I'd heard it quoted before, but he said what President Reagan told Senator Dole was, if you can get 80% of what we want in this bill, you better take it. We'll come back next week and get the rest of the 20%. Certainly I was more comfortable with Congressman Pompeo's bill. What I want to stress here is once again a situation we had no congressman from the big first in that play. I never saw our congressman being quoted or being a leader in the discussion on the House side over the last year. We need a voice at the table, whether it's GMO or crop insurance. I'm not totally satisfied with Senator Roberts' bill, but it's the best we can do to get something passed. And if we don't get something done soon, Vermont's bill is going to come in and start taking effect. So right now, this is a great example of what it takes. Sometimes you do have to reach across the aisle and down the aisle to get the very best that you can without compromising any of your virtues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Congressman Huelskamp.
Dr. Marshall does mention the House bill that we passed through the House and was a bipartisan effort to address this issue of Vermont. And here's the situation. Vermont, by, I believe, an initiative, mandated every food product in their state would have a label on it. Every food product. So well, why worry about Vermont? Well, every company in this country eventually feeds into Vermont. And so they wanted to require labels for all of our products, starting at the farm gate, all the way through the process. It's not going to work. It's going to cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars every year for the average American family. So we worked together, a number of us. Doesn't because it wasn't in the newspaper doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I worked together with Congressman Mike Pompeo, went through the Energy and Commerce Committee that he is on. It got stalled in the Senate because the Democrats said no. Bernie Sanders said no. They refused to compromise. I know Pat worked diligently, and he finally got a compromise. Hopefully that's going to pass in the Senate. And when we return next week, we will pass that protection. I think it gives too much to the folks that have targeted GMO. One thing that I am able to do as an actual farmer is actually say, here's what's happened on our farm. Here's how we've increased production. This is how we're doing it more safely for the environment. And by the way, there's an effort underway by the EPA. They want to ban atrazine. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be a real threat to farming here in western Kansas, along with all the other regulations on top of that. So we're working with Farm Bureau and numerous other groups to push back on that regulation. But don't forget, at the end of the day, every one of these regulations none of them have ever been approved by Congress. I think we need to pass a law. We passed it through the House, something called the REINS Act that said if you're going to pass major regulations, they should be approved by folks elected by the American people rather than bureaucrats pulled up in an agency somewhere in Washington, D.C.
The audience we're able to get to here, this is kind of a long one, so bear with me, please. Congressman Huelskamp, over the past several years, you have blamed former Speaker John Boehner as the reason you were removed from the House Ag Committee. However, prior to your removal from Ag, you were kicked off the Budget Committee by the current Speaker, Paul Ryan. We as constituents have repeatedly recognized your refusal to work with GOP leadership in Washington, D.C.
Hey, Mark, let me interrupt that question.
Okay.
That question is false. I was not kicked off the Budget Committee before the Ag Committee. And so I don't know if the person wants to submit that or how we want to. I know Roger Marshall said that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not true. That happened in the same meeting on the same day in December of 2012. So, long question, and I just want to point out that that's incorrect. So I don't know if you want me to answer a question that's false.
Here, let me get there is a question in here. How will another term be different from your past record? Also, how can the Big First gain representation back on the House Ag Committee and have a representative work with Congress to help Kansans?
We had a debate last night, Mark, and one thing that Dr. Marshall said that I think was misleading, that I wouldn't be back on the Ag Committee. And I asked Dr. Marshall last night, who has he talked to about that? The answer was nobody. There was no answer. I've actually talked to Speaker Paul Ryan. Let me tell you the difference between Paul Ryan and John Boehner. Paul Ryan actually respects people that serve in the House. John Boehner said it was my way or the highway. In December of 2012, before I voted against the Speaker, Mr. Marshall, you said that incorrect as well, they kicked 4 of us off committees. And it was a punishment for conservatives because I wouldn't vote to raise taxes, I wouldn't vote to raise the debt ceiling, and I wouldn't give in to Barack Obama's demands on numerous things. John Boehner wanted to punish us. At the end of the day, as I told the Speaker in a meeting after that, very respectfully, I'm at it, just the 2 of us, and he take me out where I said, Mr. Speaker, without due respect, I don't work for you. I don't work for you. Which is kind of interesting, because when John Boehner was on the back row in the 1990s, he actually led a little group of 7 folks that created problems for a speaker at that time. But at the end of the day, this is not about creating problems. It's about making solutions. What we've seen under Speaker Paul Ryan that's dramatically different is input. Anybody wanted to come and work on health care reform in the House? We've put together a plan. Anybody wanted to work on a reform on the tax side, which we desperately need to do to get rid of the IRS and get rid of 75,000 pieces of the tax code, pages of the tax code, we're able to do that. So that's dramatically different. But I have visited directly with the Speaker of the U.S. House, and he said, Tim, you deserve to be back on the Ag Committee. You know why? Not because of me, but because of you in this district. But I will tell you, as a 5th-generation farmer, that's what we need on the Ag Committee. We need someone with experience, someone that actually can go look the Vietnamese ambassador in the eye and say, hey, you know, we raise the safest pork in the world. That was a fantastic opportunity, and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to do that on the Ag Committee. We're going to do that on the House floor as well. So I'm looking forward to changes, and I appreciate the support of Paul Ryan as we move forward, changing the House, open it up to let more folks, particularly conservatives, have a say.
Thank you, Congressman. Dr. Marshall.
Will a zebra ever change its stripes? Tim also forgot to mention that before you got kicked off both those committees, he was kicked off his committee in Topeka for similar reasons, the inability to get along and play well with others. There takes a certain amount of respect, and that's what's wrong with professional politicians. They never spend any time growing up or spending time in the community, developing rapport and growing relationships. My grandmother had a saying, once a man loses his reputation, you can never get it back. And I'm afraid that our congressman has lost his reputation in Washington. I wish I could say differently, but he's not getting back on the ad committee. And I don't have to speak to anybody because the silence is so loud. Well, why isn't Speaker Ryan, why isn't the chairman of the ad committee supporting him saying, yeah, we're talking about it, we're going to do something about it. But there is silence in Washington when this issue comes up. And I would challenge your newspaper, call somebody in Washington, call the speaker, call the chairman of the ad committee, ask do they think if our congressman's going to get back on that ad committee, versus that's going to be my highest priority, and we'll work our tail off to get back on it and give Kansas a voice again in agriculture.
Background in the military, how would you differ from what Congressman Huelskamp has done on issues of national security?
I think first and foremost is that I'll rise to a leadership position. I have a good relationship with the military already. I have a good relationship with the officers at Fort Riley. I understand them very, very well. I will support them. I won't vote against a pay raise for the troops. I won't vote against funding for the military. Right now, we're sending our boys to a gunfight with knives. Our military has never been in such ill rapport. I will have a relationship with the military. I have a responsibility to my soldiers to make sure that we have a great army. I have a responsibility for the international safety of this country as well. I think I understand military affairs very, very well and will rise to leadership positions there as well.
Thank you. Congressman Huelskamp.
Yeah, Mark, that's a great question. And you see tonight a lot of bickering back and forth, but on this issue, just as I walked out and came over here, I saw the notice on the screen of another 28 murdered in an airport in Turkey. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a real threat to our nation. It's called ISIS, and it's called radical Islamic terrorism. And just this last week, I voted to fund the military, voted to raise the pay of our troops, and I'm at Fort Riley regularly. But that's an aside, ladies and gentlemen. We need leadership in the office of the president that is willing to call a spade, whether it's at Fort Hood, whether it's at Orlando, out in California. Ladies and gentlemen, it's radical Islamic terrorism that is threatening our nation. And this president and his folks in the military refuse to accept that. I would say the generals at Fort Riley, and they change about every year, they privately agree with me on that. But they have to listen to the commander-in-chief. So I look forward to an election and a cycle where we have someone on the Republican side that's willing to stand up, and that's what Donald Trump is doing, say, here is the problem, ladies and gentlemen. It's radical Islamic terrorism. ISIS is not a Christian organization, ladies and gentlemen. If you read the papers, you think that's what it is. But at the end of the day, they are out to destroy our way of life, and they will use terrorism to do that. They will strap bombs to their 12-year-old kids and walk into military camps. At the end of the day, we have died. The president has died at the hands of our military by refusing to identify the problem. And I will tell you, we have to have adequate funding, but throwing money at the problem is not the answer. We need leadership from the top down. We need leadership in the middle, and folks that are willing to put together a plan. 6 months ago, we told this president, Barack Obama, send us a plan to destroy ISIS. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still waiting on that plan.
Your doctoral dissertation, you said that farm support like crop insurance was an emotional button used by politicians during re-election campaigns in rural districts. You consistently voted against a farm bill and crop insurance, but you said you're for it when you're in Kansas. How do we know you're not just saying this to get reelected like your dissertation?
Mark, was that an audience-submitted question, or was that from Mr. Marshall?
That was from the crowd.
Okay, that was from his staff. I understand.
Yeah.
That is not in the dissertation. Roger Marshall, have you read my dissertation? No. Okay, it was not in the dissertation. That quote has been resurrected again and again and again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not in there. Let's get past the fabrications. The Hutch News talked about Roger Marshall's fabrications earlier this week when he made up newspaper headlines. Dissertation's 410 pages, doctor, and I would recommend you don't read it. It is about public policy making. In that dissertation, I talked about a policy from 1909 called parity. Anybody here old enough to remember parity? I see Mr. Shore over there. Not quite. I'm just kidding. Parity was from 1909. Cecil remembers that. That policy died in about 1980. The reference that the media reported at the insistence of my opponent has to do with the parity policy. We abandoned that in the 1980s. We need to look forward. And here's what we need to look forward to getting past this. We need to look forward to the fact that 95% of our customers, Kansas farmer, our customers live outside this nation. 95%. That's why I've sat down with the Cuban ambassador, invited and received. The Vietnamese ambassador came to Washington County, Kansas. That's why I visited with the Japanese ambassador and talked about Kansas beef. We watched them roll over steaks on their grill. And we're going to continue to do that because I'm proud of what we do. I'm proud of the things we put together. But the next farm bill, I'm sitting with Pat Roberts, who's chairman of the Ag Committee, and Pat's endorsed my re-election, saying we can't go back to policies in the 1980s. We have to look beyond our borders. And if you look at both candidates for president, that's probably the thing that concerns me both, that they seem to agree on, is the fact they don't want us to trade anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, 52% of our wheat leaves this country. Can you imagine if we couldn't sell our wheat anymore? We've got a long ways to go to continue to convince folks. I had a colleague of mine from Florida. He was in the textile business. He says, well, Tim, I'm not worried about trade. I said, well, I have to be, because we actually do the best production in the world. And if we can't trade, we're going to destroy our ag markets.
Thank you, Congressman. Dr. Huelskamp, or Dr. Marshall.
Tim, I have to be honest and feel like you say this, but you do that. You say this, you say that you're for agriculture, you're for the farmer, that you vote with Nancy Pelosi against crop insurance, you vote against the farm bills, you're consistently the odd man out, battling over something else. And you're missing the whole point here, is that we need crop insurance. What I can do for this district is I think I can go to Washington, D.C. and talk to a congressman or congresswoman who's never been to a farm. And I can explain to them that if you want a safe, reliable, affordable food source, we need crop insurance. That crop insurance doesn't just protect the farmer anymore. It protects the loan in your banks in Garden City. It protects Kansas. It protects this country. We need a person with relationships that can form coalitions to help get a new farm bill rather than constantly bickering about it. I appreciate the congressman's experiences. Those experiences he describes with other nationalities are something every freshman congressman should be doing. But show me the meat. Show me how any of those conversations have led to increased sales for this state or for this country. Show me the meat. If you had relationships with those people and were on the Ag Committee, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be better for Kansas if you could put 2 and 2 together and make 8 out of it? And that's the type of business guy I am, always looking for opportunities to grow the economy, to grow Kansas, to find solutions, to work with other people.
We're going to start this one with you. We have time for one more question here from the audience, and I do apologize, but we are under some time constraints, so we do thank you all for participating. In Washington, it seems like the gridlock has gotten to the point where conservatives say no just to say no. For example, something as benign as health care for 9/11 rescue workers cannot pass. At what point does principled pushback become saying no for the sake of it?
It's crazy. It's crazy. In Topeka, in Washington, D.C., we have the right and the left fighting with each other over so many little things. We can't get anything done, the inability to put their differences aside. Healthcare can be attacked incrementally. I'm certainly in favor of repealing the Affordable Care Act, but there's 4 or 5 things I bet 90% of us would agree upon that we could do. Why do we have to have a 2,000-page bill? Why couldn't we just vote on health insurance being bid across state lines? A real simple economic 101 type of plan where it would increase competition, which ends up decreasing the price and makes a better service for the patients. Just something simple like that. We can't get off the ground because the right and the left are fighting with each other. We need peacekeepers, we need peacemakers, we need people that can solve problems, not professional politicians of 20 years.
Pat Roberts voted against that farm bill as well. I really respect his opinion, and you've been very critical of some of his votes, and that's okay if you want to criticize our senior senator who's endorsed my re-election. But let's remember how we got Obamacare. Let's remember. Not a single Republican voted for it because the Democrats wrote that in a back rip, ladies and gentlemen. And every time we put up significant reforms to Obamacare, we made some smaller changes. Some of the worst things, and I helped sponsor some of those changes through. Barack Obama said he would veto it. You've got to have a 2/3 vote to veto it. This president was never willing. And you see it today, he's not willing to work with folks. We put a repeal on his desk. He immediately vetoed it. We said, well, show us a plan on repeal alternative. The Senate Democrat says, we're not even going to talk about it. We're not even going to allow to vote on it. We passed literally hundreds of bills through the House, some of them bipartisan, some with only a few Democrats, some with only Republicans. But what we've seen in the Senate, particularly when Harry Reid was running the show, they wouldn't let him come up to a vote. And that is a roadblock in the Senate. The House can't change that. That's their internal rules. But I know both Senator Roberts and Senator Moran are working hard to open that up and give us a shot. And that's why we need a new president. And I think most folks in this country have said enough with this president. And they want to see a different occupant in the White House. But I will tell you, whoever the next occupant is, and I hope it's a Republican, and our nominee will be Donald Trump, it will be someone that has to fight for very specific principles. And fight for them. If you sit back and say, I'm going to make peace with the EPA, you get the waters of the U.S. rule. If you say you're going to make peace with Barack Obama, you're going to get the listing of the lesser prairie chicken and 200 other species. At the end of the day, there's very little building on the left. And the Democrats, that's what you saw last week on the House floor where they laid out across the floor. It's hard to make peace when Nancy Pelosi is laying on the ground. That's what needs to change.
Thank you. Statements, and again, these are, please wrap it up in 3 minutes. Dr. Marshall, we'll start with you, please.
Tonight I've tried to share some of the differences between Mr. Huelskamp and myself. And the first one is probably some leadership style. The blame game, blaming other people for the problems. As I've been through the big first, there's probably 4 main issues that people want to talk about, and I want to make sure you understand the differences between the two of us. I can get back on the Ag Committee. It's a gamble if he can get back on or not. The next issue is national security. I believe in peace through strength. I believe in adequately funding our military. Tim has voted consistently against funding for the military. The next issue is business. I've helped create hundreds of jobs. I signed a paycheck for people every other week for 25 years. I understand business. I understand overregulation. I understand banking. I understand healthcare. I understand agriculture. I understand the military. That probably encompasses about 90% of the jobs in this community right now, and even spent a year teaching and coaching at a community college. I understand business, I understand jobs. Healthcare, if there's no other reason to send me to Washington, it would be to help not only repeal the Affordable Care Act, but know what to fix it with. I understand healthcare as a physician of 25 years. I've helped run a hospital for 15 years. I purchased health insurance for 300 employees. I purchased health insurance for a group of 5, and I even help oversee 3 different county health departments, so I understand public health. So as we write these new laws, as we start replacing it, I'll be able to predict the unintended consequences of many of the bills and legislation. I will bring back solutions that actually work, that maintain the physician-patient relationship and the sanctity of it, period. But the biggest reason you should send me to Washington is this. God gives us all different spiritual gifts, and the gift God has given me is that of a peacemaker. Since I've been 10 years old, my brother has called me Henry Kissinger. I have the ability to walk into a group of angry people, of board members, whether it's a hospital or a school board or a church board, diffuse the anger, absorb the anger, get people to put their differences aside. And what I find is if we start discussing the problem, if we start listening to each other, respecting each other, if I look through the problem through your eyes and your eyes and your eyes, then I better understand the problem. And then we start talking about solutions. And I think the solution that you and I come up with is better than the solution I can come up with. I truly believe that the solutions we come up with as made as a group are a lot better. And at the end of the day, when we walk out of this room and the committee, the group has made a decision, we're going to respect each other. We're not going to go out and throw each other under the bus with the press. We're going to support the decision to move this community forward. Whether you're building a new school, new ball fields, whatever it is, we need to function as a team to make this country move better. I'm so pleased to be here tonight. I'd be so honored to be your congressman and give you a voice back on the Ag Committee. I'm Dr. Roger Marshall. Please vote for us on August the 2nd, the Republican primary. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. Congressman Huelskamp.
Yep. Thank you, Mark and Steve. I appreciate Chamber hosting this. Oftentimes in debates and forums, they're marked oftentimes what you don't hear versus what you do. And one thing that does bother me about Roger Marshall's background that he hasn't talked about was there was a Catholic hospital in Great Bend, Kansas that he ran out of business. He shut the doors of that Catholic hospital, ladies and gentlemen. And that worries me. That worries me because I have 70 community hospitals across the big First District, and there are plenty of people in Washington wouldn't mind if our small rural hospitals disappeared. You can see that under Obamacare and the way they set that up, and the way they set up to defund Medicare. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't risk a system that doesn't care about our rural hospitals. Another thing I want to note, again, is my commitment to agriculture. It's one thing to say you know everything about it. It's another thing to actually have been there and done that. It's one thing to say that you've not talked to a single person in Washington, D.C., but somehow you know what Speaker Paul Ryan is thinking. But the point is, there's a steering committee to make those decisions. It's not the old days when one speaker would stand up and say, hey, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're on. That's the old past. We need to move beyond that. If you look at my proven conservative record, and if you want a conservative in Washington, D.C., you already got one. That's why I've been endorsed by the NRA. No mention tonight about the Second Amendment. This president's after that. I've been endorsed by Kansans for Life because I am the only one with a pro-life record in this race. And there's some very disturbing details about my opponent's current practices that raise some questions about that. I am also endorsed by the Family Research Council because I think families are the building blocks of society. And this is just not about talk, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually about a voting record. And I will tell you, as a conservative, what probably upsets me the most is when my Republican colleagues say one thing at home and do a different thing in Washington, D.C. But I will tell you without a doubt, what I say here, that's the way I've been voting. Go check the record. I will not vote for every spending bill, and I have not. But I will vote against every single tax increase. And just last night, my opponent announced he was supporting a $23 billion tax increase at the debate just in Hutchinson, Kansas, just last night. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't need more taxes. We need less spending in Washington, D.C. We need to get rid of the IRS. We have a lot of problems out there. And it's one thing to say you're a peacemaker, and the Barton County records, court records actually suggest otherwise, and I encourage you to look at those online. The fact is, we have our future of our nation at stake. And enough bickering here at home and saying that I'm conservative, you're conservative. Let's just look at the voting record and look at our background. Because we need to fight to save this country. We really do need to fight to save this country. Thank you for the honor of serving as your member of Congress. We've got a lot of work to do, a lot of things we can disagree on and agree on a lot of things. But at the end of the day, we've got to agree to save this nation. What's happening in Washington, D.C. is not helpful to that end. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Thank you. Again, audience, would like to apologize. We did not have enough time for all the questions. On behalf of the Garden City Area Chamber of Commerce, would like to thank Congressman Huelskamp, Dr. Marshall for being here tonight and helping us to become more informed voters. So thank you again. We will take a brief break here, and we'll get started back up as close as we can to 7 o'clock with the Kansas candidates for the House and the Senate. Thank you very much.